Hello, everyone. I am Claudio Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire podcast. Welcome back to a new episode. If you want to support the channel, please go to www.spiritualinspire.ca and make a donation. My guest today is Tricia Isman. Tricia, I'm very honored to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And as I was saying before we got started, I think it's going to be a really great conversation. I can just feel the energy of the medicine and the energy of all of the beautiful things that want to come through. So really excited to talk to you.
Thank you. And, I would like to start with a very controversial subject and, in fact, organization, because on your bio, you mentioned that you spoke in front of the WEF crowd, and
Yeah.
they don't have a good name these days, and they want to suppress our freedoms, our food quality, and everything else. And I want to know if you were invited or you reach out to them, and what was the purpose of that interaction?
Oh, I'm so glad you went there. Um, it's interesting because I feel like in the world of being an initiated medicine woman, going to Gabon, you work with the all kinds of spiritual forces, including the darkest of the dark. And so you learn how to face the deepest things. And I truly believe that the World Economic Forum, all of these groups and organizations that exist in our world are a collective manifestation of our unconscious minds. It's our own unconscious behaviors, our own choices that we make where we're not using our voices, where we're not setting our boundaries, where we're essentially letting a very specific kind of archetype rule the planet by giving away our power and not realizing that it is within our soul. And so these opportunities to me, although they tend to be very exhausting because, it's like there's many things happening on many layers in these forums. This particular event, I was invited by a group of people that I started working with who are very benevolent, more on the benevolent side of really the space of psychedelics and policy, and really wanting to move the narrative forward related to allowing these healing modalities to happen. And they have for many years hosted events where they book out a private home on the mountain in Davos, where they host a series of different events. And some of the events that were hosted that I was part of, I was staying in one of the houses, was like Young Global Leaders, which is another side of WEF that people are, a little iffy about. And I really feel like the way that we're going to move the needle in terms of consciousness on this planet, I mean, it's both sides. It's like healing for everyone, but it's also there needs to be a fundamental shift in leadership in our planet. And if you go back to like pre-Diluvian times and even the times when, we were in Pharaonic Egypt, all of the pharaohs went through initiations to be empowered, to be in leadership. And I truly believe that the problem with our world today is that we lack initiation in our society, but we also lack initiation in our leadership. The people that should be running the planet, making these big decisions, or even representing people in making these decisions, need to have a certain grounded level of understanding, of balance, of equanimity, of really environmental stewardship. And so, to be a Trojan horse and to be able to be in this forum and be able to connect one-on-one with young people that have not necessarily been co-opted yet, maybe are in ignorance of what this agenda really stands for. And on the other side of the coin, how else are we going to shift the narrative? Because the reality is these groups have a lot of power. They don't have all the power, but they have a lot of power. And they're doing things, especially from an environmental perspective, that are harmful. They are directly harmful to the environment. There's a lot of greenwashing happening, a lot of fake sustainability. And if we want to build ecological communities, and I've had this experience myself dealing with, for example, in the Azores, I'm building a retreat center, and the tourism board gets a lot of their narratives that kind of trickle down from the EU, which the EU is in bed with the World Economic Forum. And I said, you know, one thing that's really important to us from an ecological standpoint is that people need to have connection to the elements. One of the narratives of this bigger World Economic Forum mission is to get rid of fire. And there's an alchemical aspect of fire in the home that is really essential for maintaining the balance in power within ourselves. I talk about this in a chapter in my book called Solar Eclipse in Seeding Consciousness, that when we got separated as a society from fire, which, you know, primarily came with the invention of combustion engines and electricity and all of these things, which are all fire-based technologies, we lost respect for our relationship with fire. We had a healthy respect for it because it would literally destroy, it would burn down entire cities. If you look at back at the ancient history of all the major cities, at least in the United States that I'm aware of, you know, San Francisco, Seattle, all of the big major cities have had complete annihilations from fire. And the reality is that fire is a alchemical cleansing agent, and sometimes it's necessary when certain energies get out of balance in a society for that to come through and clean that out. Of course, you know, there are lives sometimes at stake in this, and but also, you know, when we think about nature and the way we are with nature, there are lives at stake in the entire planet with us getting out of balance with this fire. So, you know, long answer to the question, but I really feel that the World Economic Forum is probably one of the best places that, you know, I could be, you know, to be talking about these topics.
Yes, and I agree with you that that's a good place as long as you, again, have this, you make your point the way you just made it here, and people
Mhm.
won't associate you with the dark negative side of that organization. Because one of
Mhm.
the reasons and power and fire within me, just to be in accord with what you said, for
Yeah.
starting the podcast was to bring awareness and increase consciousness. And later on, when
Mhm.
I got into plant medicine, and I recently mentioned this on another episode with my guest, was every single politician should go through a plant medicine ceremony, because that will reveal about himself, that's the good side and the dark side of himself or herself. And it will, in the end, it
Yes.
will make the decision, yes, I am good, I am fit for the office, or I'm not. And I will step down and let the other person to bring in that necessary change to the society. So by you
Yeah.
going there and bringing forward the power of sacred plant medicine, I think it's a very important step. But now my next question, if you can share, have they
Mhm.
tried, or they just listened to a presentation?
Obviously, I'm not allowed to talk about the people individually that I've worked with, but I will say that I've worked with some of the Hollywood elites. I've worked with royalty. I've worked with government people like officials, diplomats, all over the world. You know, my work primarily is focused in jurisdictions where you can do this work legally. So I started a retreat company about 9 years ago called Psychedelic Journeys. And really, the idea was to have this accessible but done in a very safe way and respectful way. And because there's, you know, gray areas in Mexico, and Costa Rica is very open, a lot of the retreats that I would do were there. But there are other places, you know, where certain things are permissible. And, you know, now I'm really focusing on how do we make this accessible in other places, but doing it in the correct way. And our biggest, my husband is a doctor, he's a psychologist, he's also a psychedelic researcher, Dr. Joseph Barsulia. And our mission is we've spent the last 10 years of our work in the psychedelic space, taking that information and over the last 2 years, digesting it into some type of modern initiatic framework that can be used for leaderships, but really also directed towards creativity. So it's like really bringing about this balance between the left and right hemisphere of the brain, because that's the only way that real leadership is going to happen, is if we're using our intuition, our hearts, our souls, and also the feminine aspects of, each of us within our psyches and our personalities. It has to be balanced with the masculine. And so, yeah, I think we're in a really important time, because I feel like society is really open and accepting to these things, but it's like there are some, we're also in the time, like I would call it, like almost like reliving the Tower of Babel, where there's a lot of confusion and disillusion. And I see how some of these things are being co-opted and kind of people are trying to move them into directions to where they actually will not cause proliferation of consciousness and love and unity and all of these things. And so it's like, how do we create the frameworks to allow them to happen in a good way? So for example, the work that I'm doing with the Kagaba is an indigenous area, which in the mountains of Colombia. And they are these indigenous culture that through divination, they have these kind of high order of, I hate to use the word priests, but they're like a high priestly order that go through a 9-year initiation in darkness. So talk about a leadership initiation. And their job really, after they finish this initiation, is to maintain the balance between humans and nature. And they do that through making different offerings to the earth called pagamentos, which essentially settle our debts. They can't make enough of them to settle all of our debts at the moment, because we're accruing debt really, really quickly. But they are really, keeping, I think, a lot of cataclysms from happening, because this balance in nature is so important for us to really be able to live on this planet and thrive on this planet. So at G20 in India, we were asked, me alongside with some other organizations and the Kogi, how do you take indigenous wisdom and articulate it into policy? So the Kogi Mamus got into a council. They gave a divination of what they were to offer to this, and then they gave it to this working group, and I was part of this working group. And the thing that really was the most important thing to me is like that we have to change the systems for which capitalism is structured, which I've been working on. I created a new structure that's very early in its stages called a for consciousness company. So it's the idea of changing GDP to CDP, which is conscious domestic product. So it's like, how are we being intentional throughout the process and looking at the side effects and looking at the impacts to the next 7 generations? And then also a program that came from this working group that I've been working on is called Ancestral Stewardship. And it's the idea of how do we support financially through different types of capitalistic vehicles, giving back and empowering indigenous-led reciprocity work that leads to environmental preservation. And that's kind of what we've been doing at Ancestral Heart for the last 4 years, actually 5 years now. But it's really about collaborative works where we can work alongside these wisdom keepers that really have a deeper understanding than modern society of how we maintain the balance with nature.
Yes, so many things I want to touch on, and there are some of my questions as well, but you brought some new perspective. So yes, I always said that GDP is not sustainable. The mindset for having every single year higher and higher GDP or continuous upwards GDP is not sustainable, just because we have to drill more, go for more resources. And there is always a contradiction between the shareholders of big corporations that require a profit, and then the ESG terminology and action they exclude each other. They cannot
Mm-hmm.
be in sync. It's not possible. And I
Mm-hmm.
always say that the government suppression of new technologies is what brought us to this point where we are right now, because we don't need huge power corridors with power lines and have all this land blocked instead of having parks and communal gardens, because we have technologies, again, suppressed by the government for the last 100 years, that we could
Mm-hmm.
have put to use and have a much better life.
I agree with you 100%. And the thing that makes me so sad of all of this, um, is, it's actually, I think more than the government, it's the corporations that keep these systems in place because the capitalistic system thrives on growth. And the system of venture capital is based on returns, and the companies that get capital are companies that, are unicorns, where, technology companies where, someone can 100x their investment. And these are people that already have massive amounts of wealth. And then when you look at the way that these companies are managed, these people sit on the board of these companies. So even if the company has an altruistic or purpose-driven mission, they, are the puppeteers, because ultimately the CEOs and founders are in handcuffs when, a board member has a specific narrative that they believe needs to happen for the company to be successful, because it's all about profits. And that cannot work. And so what you're saying is 100% accurate when you look at nature and you look at the cycles of nature. If you just take the idea of the 4 seasons of the year, this is the creation cycle of the planet. And nature has the ability to create beyond bounds. It has the ability to create beyond its own base energy, which is exponential, because it has the ability to tap into the mystical, because it's aligned with nature. And when nature is working alongside you, you bring in the energy of the elementals, the earth, the air, the water, the fire, which actually are mystical creation forces. And so when companies start to look at, how do I look at this from a perspective of being regenerative? How do I look at this from the perspective of looking at the life cycle of my company, looking at, for example, when a company has issues with, you know, getting its product out there to the world, that is red flags. And those red flags usually cue a death cycle. And with death cycles, there's a very important process of inquiry to where you go in and you really get your stakeholders together and you really tap into what this company wants to, shift into. And that might be death. It might be an ending. And sometimes those endings are really important. Like, there's a reason we don't have CDs anymore. There's a reason we don't have 8 tracks anymore. And we don't use those old crystal radios. In order for society collectively to have progress, we have to retire old technologies that no longer serve humanity, the environment, all of these things. And so I think it's really important that we're really applying these templates of nature into the way that we look at companies. And ultimately, you use the word the government. The government's responsibility is really lies in maintaining authenticity, sincerity, and equanimity within a greater community, which is whatever its jurisdiction is. And if it's not doing that, then it's failed. And so really the governments are not necessarily, I mean, they failed in the sense that they're allowing this system to stay in place, but they're only playing the game they know how to play. I mean, the whole system needs a complete overhaul, and it needs leadership that really is able to tap into the collective needs and align that with the environmental needs and our future needs. And, it's really all of us holding the dream of that, because it's really our dreams, our currency, and the currency of the future is how can we dream up, I love the word or the title, Charles Eisenstein's book, A More Beautiful World Than Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And that's really going to come from us all doing that, really meditating on what's my part within that dream and stepping into that role.
Yes, I agree that technology is necessary in our lives, but at the same time, do I need Apple version 20? No,
Mm,
because everything Apple 13 or 15 does right now, I think is enough for me. The quality
yeah.
of the camera is amazing. It has 3 or 4 cameras, okay? I don't need 5 or 6. So guys, stop there, okay? Develop something else, or I don't know, but they are surviving and they are existing by coming up with new models and
Mhm,
enticing us to go and buy these new models. Uh, Coming with an excuse that it's much, much better, much, much
mhm,
faster. But we don't need that. The same, combustion engine. Okay, they went to the electric cars. To me, that is not a shift. That is just another way of pillaging the earth, because you need so many resources to create the batteries and everything else. Go back to Tesla, go back to other inventors who um, went beyond the electric cars. They went to a different type of technology which taps into the
mhm.
ether. Okay, so these are
Yes.
technologies which I'm looking for. I'm looking at being implemented and alleviate the pressure on Mother Earth.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think there's two different aspects here that we have to look at from a societal perspective. The one aspect is that societies are being incentivized to bring in a minimum viable product, and this is very common in technology. The other is that there really aren't incentives for excellence. And excellence is not about a minimum viable product, it's about a best possible product. And that really comes with refinement and work and research and prototyping. And the current capitalism model doesn't actually accommodate for that because it doesn't necessarily have a creation cycle that fits within that model and the returns that fit within that model. And then the other piece is, I was part of a working group with this group called Holistic Visions with the LaSalle Foundation. And for 2 years in 2018 and 2019, we had councils of 144 people, 12 groups of 12, alongside with Indigenous elders that kind of popped into each of the groups and kind of shared insights and wisdom. And, myself, I've gone really deep into the idea of free energy because I really think that it is something we need to look at from a societal perspective, to prevent forest fires, to prevent pollution, to prevent waste, to allow ease for travel for all human beings. And so on one side of the coin, we brought in the Kogi Mamus, Mama Luis, Mama Evangeliste, and we said, what do you think about free energy and what do you think, should happen? And, what's your opinion in this area? And they said, well, let's see here. First off, humans, they're living in boxes. They're looking at boxes when they died, they're buried in a box, but the universe thinks in spirals. And so, what they were relaying in that message is that, we really need to get back to the way of organic forms and nature forms and how we're living, because, just the baseline way of this box, it impacts our thinking, our being, our connection to nature energy. So you can do and more do and da 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 da. And they were just like kind of making fun of it, like in the sense of like, I think people need more being rather than doing. And so the question is, will the free energy create more doing and more escaping from really us being present with ourselves, or will it actually be liberating? And so that is a deeper question I've been meditating on, and how that would be able to be maybe staged and released into humanity in a way that it wouldn't create that. And yeah, and then on the other side of the coin, um, you know, we do need these technologies. When you look at the forest fires in California that were caused by down power lines, when we think about all the natural disasters that we have that shut off the power grids, when we think about climate change, places like Austin, Texas had so much heat, everyone had their air conditioners on. And because they had their air conditioners on, it shorted out the grid. And there were like elderly people that like died in their homes because they didn't have electricity. And the same happened during, there was a really bad frost storm that came through Texas, extreme weather. And that was about 2.5 years ago, and same thing happened. No one had heat. They were all freezing to death. No one had gas for their cars. And so we really have to think about these things from a systems perspective, and looking at where these bottlenecks are and how we can create better systems that are going to, really bring about this level of excellence, but also, can't be manipulated in a way that they create more unconsciousness.
Yes, and what you mentioned also borders self-preparedness to any of
Mm-hmm.
these type of events, and we became so complacent that we don't have enough food in our homes, or a water, or a
Mm-hmm.
generator, or a battery. So we are caught off guard when something like this happens. And
Yeah.
and going back to self-sustainability, maybe for some people are old news, but I just been exposed to the Ringing Cedars book series, Anastasia by
Mm.
Vladimir Migre. And
Yes.
in those books, they give away a strategy on how you can become self-sustainable. And
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what you think of Putin. In 2001, he put through a law that he allowed every single family to be given for free between 1 and 3 acres, no, sorry, between 2.5 and 7.5 acres of land on which they will build
Mm-hmm.
their house and a garden, and they will grow whatever they want tax free. Tell me if any
Wow.
Western leader will dare to do something like that. But he did
Mm.
it. He encouraged people to go to the countryside, grow their own food with no pesticides. And then that food can be sold to those in the cities who are not willing to move out, or make the weekly trip to the countryside and have a second property and take care of it. So he did that. But here, the land is so expensive that you cannot
Mm-hmm.
afford it. Not even 1 acre. I mean, not in Canada, at least. It's very, very expensive. And in
Mm-hmm.
certain parts of the USA, for sure. And Europe doesn't
Yep.
have enough land to go through this type of uh, gesture, you know. But
Yeah.
you have to think in terms of sustainability. I have my own small backyard, and I have a patch of garden when I grow whatever I can, and I'm amazed by the fruits of the ground, of the what Mother Nature gives me back. And the
Mm-hmm.
zucchini is this small in the morning, and next day, 24 hours later, is like this big. Oh my God, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I've dived into the Ringing Cedars many years ago, and I remember pieces of it. I wish I had studied it more, but I remember one of the things that Anastasia said was that you have to have a dacha. Every person should have a dacha, which is your own garden that you garden in, and that you grow your own food, and that you take the seeds and you put your own saliva on them when you
Yes,
plant them, and they attune to your DNA and will pull all the nutrients from the environment that you need for your body. So it's like you're basically making your own medicine, which is
exactly.
so incredible. And many years ago, I was part of a group of people that started a nonprofit, which I'm not as involved with now, but I was really there for the kind of the beginning piece called Kiss the Ground. They have a couple films out. And the reason I got involved with it and what really inspired me was at that time, I felt like, what can we do? Like me, one little person, what can I do? You know? And Graham Sate, who was this researcher who really studied the mycorrhiza fungi, which are like the mycorrhizal network that's, in the soil, which is all the microorganisms and fungi that work in a, biosinosis together to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. He said if 1.5%, I think it was, and please do not quote me on this, of the arable land, which is like land where you can grow food in the United States, had this in the soil, it would basically suck all the carbon from every car on the road back into the soil. So that again goes back into, if you have a tiny plot of land, even if you just have a little deck space where you are planting some things, and you're doing it in a regenerative way where you're using the right soil organisms and, composting and doing all of that, then you too can have a huge impact. I mean, not only can you offset your own carbon footprint, but you can also, have a net positive in that, and that's good for everyone.
Yes, I do use composting. I make my own composting, and also I have copper
Mm.
pipes uh, feed into the ground, so they draw more energy. And I
Wow.
think the plants really like that because they grow every year. They are bigger and bigger, and I enjoy talking to the plants.
Yeah, the copper pipes, if I'm not mistaken, is that part of kind of like Rudolf Steiner's
Correct. Yes.
work? Yes,
Yes.
I love Rudolf Steiner because he really merges the understanding of our relationship with the environment, our own. I believe all of those are so interconnected, and that is also why I wrote the book Seeding Consciousness because in the book it's really weaving the idea of how do we bring modern society into a more initiatic way of being. It's obviously a light version of it because true initiation is a sophisticated process that's led by, initiators that, spend at least a decade in training to be able to lead those kind of initiations, at least in my tradition of Bwiti, but also in many of the other traditions, the time of study is quite advanced. And I weave into the book how essentially in this psychedelic movement, which has really blown up and gained popularity over the years, there really isn't a deep interweaving of the environmental focus. And if we're not doing that, I I usually don't say like very harsh, strong, definitive things, but I would say in this circumstance, we're doing it wrong because humans are here as a keystone species on this planet. We are here. We were given the intelligence that we have, our own individuated consciousness to be stewards of the planet. And in that stewardship, there is a net positive that's so mystical and great that, it's beyond words, that relationship. And that's how it's meant to be. It's like our relationship to the perfect mother, something that's nurturing us, feeding us, taking care of us, and we're, in reciprocity with that relationship. And then the other piece being that, really realigning ourselves with these creative cycles in the planet, really understanding how we align with these elements and with these aspects of nature, such as the ancestral realm, that are here to help us. And we need the help right now. We need this support. And you don't necessarily have to take psychedelics. They're not for everybody, or medicines. But this kind of framework is really designed to kind of help interweave the way that we can really reconnect as a more community, collective-oriented society of people that are all on the path of mastery, which is really our own individual excellence.
Yes, you're right. And I think the fear of sacred plant medicine initiation comes from the place of not knowing exactly what it is and what's going on, and the fact that it's being bashed by certain institutions. The government is forbidding plant medicine in certain countries.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm working with Gnostic TV to produce a series of interviews about demystifying sacred plant medicine and what it's all about, and bringing this awareness. And for those who are still on the fence about taking or experiencing plant medicine, because in my view, going through this type of ceremony could be the equivalent of what people in Africa and Eastern countries consider the vision quest. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
have in the West something like that. We don't go in the jungle, we don't go in the forest, to fight the demons, our own demons, or the bear, or the lion. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
going through this type of ceremony is our version of vision quest. What do you think?
I agree. I think that there's a couple of things that I would add to that. And I would say that in our society, a lot of people are thinking that the psychedelic or the plant medicine is the magic pill, but there isn't enough of the process of preparation and integration. And so I would say that as long as that process is being done with the right preparation and integration, I think that that is where people can have a mystical experience. And there has been research that has shown that in a more ceremonial framework, the percentage of people that have what you would categorize scientifically as a mystical experience based on Hood's mysticism scale, which is a scientific scale, is much higher when people are in a more ceremonial and set up kind of framework. I think where the problem in lies is that our society is very addiction focused. And I mean that from the sense of consumption focused. And so to keep consuming psychedelics over and over again and not integrating those experiences can be damaging. It can cause other psychiatric issues because it's just going to amplify the things that are not being integrated. So I think that, yes, it can be an incredible help for society. I don't think we necessarily have to follow what the government says. There's many ways of working with these tools. I think what we need are really well put together community frameworks to hold the people that are going through these initiations. Because in all of these ancient traditions, you say that the vision quest, in the Aboriginal traditions in Australia, they have the walkabout, which is similar. You have the initiations in Bwiti, you have the Sundance in the Lakota tradition, many of these different kinds of initiations, all of them have a community to catch you and hold you afterwards. And that's one thing that is really missing from the psychedelic space is, we have people that are socializing and connecting and getting inspiration and sharing their stories, but is there actually a community there to really hold you if you're having a breakdown, if you're experiencing mania, if you're whatever it is that you're having difficulty with. I mean, because there's things that the psychedelics can open up too. Like I've had people in the work that I've done that have gone into a session and realized that they were molested as a child, that they had a repressed memory. And then once that Pandora box is open, that's a journey. That's a journey of healing that thing that was so severe that it was like wiped from your memory for so many years that there needs to be a supportive resource network and community network to be able to kind of act as a harm reduction aspect. And then the other aspect that really concerns me is that, teen use is obviously escalating. I mean, when I was a teen, I was using lots of psychedelics, and now it's like even more popular. And in the teen use category, most teens are not able to find an ayahuasca center in Peru that's been well vetted and go there and do it in a ceremonial way. They're typically going onto the illegal markets. And when you're going into the illegal markets, you get things like even ketamine that's laced with fentanyl and all these things. And currently in the high schools, their education is still being taught, which is like cracking the egg in the pan. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? And obviously, we know by psychedelic research that that's a complete falsehood. It actually heals your brain. It does not fry your brain. It heals the neurons. And then, you look at like the way that society looks at teen use of tobacco. Tobacco is a sacred medicine. Nicotine is incredible for neurodivergence, for ADD. And all of these kids nowadays are on Adderall. Adderall, if you like, I actually did a study and I compared Adderall to nicotine. And I'm like, which is better? Like, which would be better to give your teenage child? Not that either of them are great to give your teenage child, but which would be the better one? And actually, the results that I found was actually nicotine's better. But yet, there's all these companies like Juul and things that are creating alternative technologies that are a little bit better than smoking carcinogenic cigarettes. But there are, nicotine lozenges that are very helpful and healthy and are a great way for when someone is struggling, that I think that teens should have access to those. I think they should be monitored, but I think that that could actually be a better solution. So it's just, again, a structural issue with how our society sees drugs, what's drugs and what's medicine, and the pharmaceutical industry having a great big hand in that.
Yes, and again, you mentioned ceremonial tobacco, which again is used in these
Mhm.
ceremonies and is not puff and huff every single day, like a cigarette. And a similar example is what Kogis are doing with the coca leaves. They chew on those every single
Mhm.
day, and that doesn't mean that they are high. Only if you process those
Mhm.
leaves, you turn them into cocaine. But other than that, they are
Yeah.
harmless. They are, in fact, they are very nutritional.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at any medicine, any drug, like for example, Iboga versus Abogaine. So Iboga is the natural plant from Gabon, which is in equatorial Africa. And it has, science has seen, anywhere from 30 to 80 known alkaloids in this plant. And the primary alkaloid is abogaine, which is works on the kappa opioid receptors to interrupt addiction, specifically opiate use, disorder. And interestingly, when you think about taking something and separating it from the whole plant, the plant has a symbiotic relationship with the environment of the jungle. The plant has a relationship where these different alkaloids work together. And then you think about like safety, for example, cardiac safety, specifically with Abogaine. I definitely believe that these whole plant extracts have their own safety mechanisms, and when used correctly, which, obviously the indigenous knowledge systems have this understanding, then they can be done in a safe way. But like with the coca leaf, for example, they've heavily extracted out this one part of the plant, and then that one part of the plant is out of balance. And, anything that's out of balance is not necessarily having the same healing benefits. The holistic healing benefits happen from the whole plant.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's not balanced anymore.
Yeah.
And Tricia, I'm very happy that you are married with an open-minded doctor,
Mm.
because I have the bad habit of bashing the pharma industry and the medical industry because of, what they are doing to us, and because they don't want to open their eyes to other or alternative ways of healing. But again, through this podcast, I really want to create a bridge between them and these ways of alternative ways of healing. Do you see now being married to the doctor? Do you think that in time they will try to go outside their own box and they will fight the medical associations to accept and include energy healing, sound healing, sacred plant medicine, and many, many others?
It's a very interesting topic because I think on one side of the coin, you have a lot of doctors that have spoken out about cancer treatments that really work and have disappeared. I won't go too deep down that rabbit hole, but they are no longer on this planet. And bless their souls for being so brave to step forward. But I think that for my husband specifically, he went to seminary. He was always a very mystical person. He was a Christian pastor and actually was a little bit kind of outed by his own church because he got so into the more Gnostic forms of Catholicism and Christianity to where it was a little bit, past the threshold that would be accepted in modern church society. But he also got sick with Lyme disease, and he's had it for pretty much his whole life. He got really sick, and that's what caused him to really question the medical system, because everything that they gave him, they put a port in his heart where they were injecting antibiotics every day into his heart for like an entire year, and it destroyed his microbiome of his gut. He didn't feel better. And eventually he found functional medicine and holistic medicine. And so really for him, it was this journey of really realizing what tools actually work. And I feel like the functional medicine field is the most potent field of the future, in terms of looking at things holistically and bridging the two together. And I also think that energy medicine, inner psyche work, I really love German New Medicine because it's really fusing the understanding of the body and the understanding of how trauma imprints and understanding how we get down to the core causes of health issues, which I think is really important. And I will also share with you something that's super interesting in this field. Last year, exactly this time of the year, I was in DC and I went to a military hospital specifically for Navy SEALs. My husband and I have done a lot of work with a nonprofit called Mission Within that has done a lot of work with special ops military, healing them with Ibogaine for traumatic brain injury. And it got the attention of this military hospital, and we met with the head of this hospital, and he gave us a tour and he explained the whole methodology. And this is a specific place. There's a few of them in the world where it's an immersive program where people usually go for like a month or longer. And these are the top military, like Navy SEALs and other special operations. And they have the peak of all equipment. Like they had this one room where they were doing brain scans to identify which parts of the brain had injuries from things for like blast wounds. And there's like copper casing around the entire room so nothing outside could get into these like very, very sensitive readings. But on the other side, they've actually published some research out of this center, and their process is they get a group of all the doctors together and they meet with the person first, because it's an interdisciplinary healing program. And each one of the people in the program all get to hear this person's story one time, so they don't have to keep rehashing the trauma over and over. And then they collectively get together and they create a program for healing for that individual. And a big piece of the program, there's 3 holistic pieces, and they've done research. They've published papers that have come out of NICO, which is the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, which is based in DC. And it's art therapy. So they go in when they arrive and they're given a mask, and they have to paint this mask, and the mask represents all of their trauma that they've experienced. So whether it's the war trauma, the traumatic brain injury, the effects that it's had on their lives. And so that's one piece of it. And at the end of the program, they let that go. They have a release ceremony where they release this mask, like they're taking off the mask of their trauma. And then the second part is that they receive acupuncture throughout the whole program. So they're getting like traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And then the third part is that they're given a animal therapy dog. So they work with animal therapy, they work with holistic traditional Chinese medicine and art therapy as a big piece of this program, and it has the highest healing results. And it's so funny that this is like in the like deepest part of the government, that this is happening. And yet, I mean, this is kind of how we should be doing it. I think all healing should be interdisciplinary and a blend of, more functional testing to identify the issues, and then adjunct with different types of treatments that will address the issues, whether they're functional or holistic, natural therapies.
I'm glad to hear that the military is open to a much more gentle and intimate way of healing. But at the same time, have you been offered a program of your own to apply either psilocybin or iboga or anything else?
I mean, there were questions about these, and I will say that there are very specific people in the military that are moving programs forward, and there have been a lot of funds committed now for research, because obviously nothing is going to be implemented on that level of a scale unless there's been some good research to make sure that it works within the framework. So I really do feel positive that this will be something that's integrated into the future. And obviously, I'll welcome the invitation to advise, as long as, I can maintain my sense of, really how these protocols are done in a positive way, because we also know that there have been some bad experiments with psychedelics in our history of understanding government research.
Yes, and you'll have to read the fine print at the bottom of that agreement to see what your limitations are.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I also, like, one of the questions I was asked during this interview with this doctor was, what do you think the likelihood is that the person will go back to battle after taking psychedelics? And it kind of stopped me for a second, because I was like, maybe they wouldn't. But then I thought about it and I was like, actually, knowing, working with so many Navy SEALs, I realized that they're so communally focused. Like, their platoons are like their brothers. They are so tightly knit that they would never leave the community, because they are so devoted to their community that they would become Trojan horses.
Could be, but also I interviewed someone else who was in the military. He left the military. He's supposed to retire. I think he was in his early 30s, and just before COVID, and they forced him to take the job, and he felt so bad. His health went down the drain. But he was on the spiritual path way before that, and he was more and more detached from the military action, from the platoon, from all the other brothers.
Yeah.
And in the end, he decided to step out, take care of himself, become that light worker, which will have impact on his military friends and brothers. But he decided to step out. He said, enough, it's enough for me. I have to take care of my health, and I'm not going back. So that's another danger, let's say danger, that these people will awake so much that they understand the killings, the trauma they produce in the world, and they might not want to go back.
This is true. And I also think it's really important that, we have angels everywhere in the world. Can you imagine if you were in the military and you didn't have this conscious awareness and you didn't have these access to these incredible tools and there was no one there to like, be a lantern, to really help you see through the darkness. And so I do believe there are angels in the world that work in the trenches that are willing to be in the darkness. And ultimately, when it comes down to the actions that you take, if you're in the front of enemy lines fighting in battle, you don't have to pull the trigger. You don't have to pull the trigger. And I do believe everyone has their own destiny and their own fate. If it's their fate to be in that place, that's the best place they can possibly be, as long as they really have the fortification of their own essence of who they are and can hold that in the face of the darkness that is, prevalent in the situation that they're in. And I truly believe that when you have that level of bravery, true heroism, true heroic, then you can shift the narrative. And you may think that you're facing something where you have to make a hard choice, but the timeline can shift at any point. That's like Neo in the Matrix, You can be Neo. You really can. Anyone can. And it really comes with like following that authentic path for yourself. And so, yeah, for some people, depending on the reasons why they joined in the first place and why they, but I do believe a lot of the people that I've worked with that have served see that their duty is to be a protector. And part of being a protector is, the stewardship of your community, wherever that is.
Yes, and I agree with you, but sometimes, the army is feeding the soldiers a false narrative and comes down from the political level. But this is a story for another time. I would like to quickly touch on your programs, and also if you can mention about your upcoming retreat in Mexico. Will open in 2025.
Ah, yes. So our retreat center is in the Azores, and it's basically a 14-room, beautiful boutique, really based on the principles of kind of Kogi bioarchitectural design. And we have thermal hot springs on our land, and it's really a place to bring people that are in the space of really wanting to step into their highest expression of creativity and leadership. And psychedelics are not legal in the Azores as of now, so it will really be focused on kind of the preparation and integration of those processes to start. And then as the legal jurisdiction shifts, then hopefully we'll be able to integrate some different therapies based on, what happens in terms of legalization. And then my book is coming out in November, but it's available for pre-order now. And that was a bit of homework that I got in Gabon in 2018. I was told to write this book, and it took me a while, but usually books take time to write. And it's finally now reaching the world. And so I would love if you, love what I shared. This is really the heart of, the greater work. And I feel like, it's just really an important time in this world where we're returning back into nature. So I feel like that any person who wants to do psychedelics, enter into spiritual work without psychedelics, or is just looking to really be supported in having done psychedelics and integrating the work that they're doing and having some incredible sense making tools. And I feel like any group of those people could really benefit from reading Seeding Consciousness. So I'm just super honored. This was like the most interesting conversation. I love that you asked a lot of tough questions, and I love your heart behind all of it and all of the areas that you're exploring in. So it's just been such a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. I did order the book. I can't wait to get it in November. And also I can give you an idea how to overcome the issue, the legal issue with sacred plant medicine in the Azores. You just rent a boat and you go into international waters, you do it there, and then you come back.
That's so funny. The boats have been coming in really strong for me. A lot. But I really, really appreciate you sharing that, because there's been a really strong messaging around boats. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you. And yeah, and if you want to pre-order the book, the easiest way is to go to seedingconsciousness.com. And my nonprofit is ancestralheart.com. And, you know, the projects that we've done over the last 5 years are all kind of listed on the front page. There's more that we've done, but most of them are listed there, so you can learn more about the important work. And I think anyone who is working with the medicines has to remember that the way that we work in relationship is reciprocity. It always is reciprocity. So supporting organizations like Ancestral Heart or other organizations that are doing this work in a good way is a really important piece and a really important part of the integration of your work with plant medicines and psychedelics.
Thank you. Tricia, I had so many questions which I left out because the discussion was interesting and you brought up so many new subjects which I didn't have in mind. So thank you for that. And we are approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
Just, you know, we're in a collective initiation right now. So I think the most important part is to remember how to breathe, how to just, you know, take time for yourself and recharge, and just always to stay in your heart and have compassion for yourself and others, because, you know, this is a really important time, and it's really how we hold ourselves and how we hold that intentional consciousness throughout this process that's going to determine the direction that we go.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you for your work and everything you bring to the world. Thank you. Many blessings.
Thank you.
And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Leave a comment, like the interview. And until next time, love and gratitude.